Jessica Carter sat quietly in the passenger seat of their SUV, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery as the familiar streets of Springfield, Ohio, faded into the open highway. They had just dropped their youngest daughter, Sophia, off at college, and the reality of being empty nesters was beginning to sink in. Michael, her husband of nearly 20 years, tried to lighten the mood with his usual optimism. "It's not the end, Jess," he said, glancing at her with a reassuring smile. "It's just a new chapter. We've got more time for us now." Jessica forced a smile in return. "I know. It's just strange. The house is going to feel so empty." Michael reached over and squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out. Together." But Jessica wasn't so sure. The truth was, she had been feeling disconnected from Michael for years. His constant travel for work had left her feeling lonely and neglected. She loved him, but the spark they once had seemed to have faded, replaced by a quiet resentment that she couldn't quite shake. It all started innocently enough. One Friday night, after another long week of Michael being away, Jessica went out with some colleagues from the elementary school where she taught. They ended up at the Rusty Anchor, a cozy restaurant and bar downtown known for its live music and lively atmosphere. Rob Wilson, one of her fellow teachers, introduced her to Daniel Harris, a charming engineer from Michael's company. Daniel was everything Michael wasn't: attentive, spontaneous, and full of life. He swept Jessica off her feet with his easy smile and quick wit. They danced the night away, and for the first time in years, Jessica felt alive. When the night ended, Daniel called her a cab and gave her a warm hug before she left. It was innocent enough, but it planted a seed in Jessica's mind. When Michael returned home the following week, Jessica didn't mention the night out. It felt like her little secret, a harmless escape from the monotony of her life. But then Daniel texted her, inviting her out again. This time, it was just the two of them. One evening, while Michael was away on a business trip, Jessica and Daniel met at the Rusty Anchor for dinner. Over glasses of wine, they talked about everything: her loneliness, his frustrations at work, their dreams for the future. Daniel confessed that he felt underappreciated at Carter Manufacturing, and Jessica found herself sympathizing with him. "Michael doesn't see what he has," Daniel said, leaning closer. "You're an amazing woman, Jessica. You deserve someone who sees that." Jessica's heart raced. She knew she was playing with fire, but she couldn't help herself. When Daniel kissed her that night, she didn't pull away. From that moment on, Jessica and Daniel began seeing each other regularly. They were careful to keep their relationship a secret, meeting only when Michael was away and the kids were busy. Jessica told herself it was just a fling, a way to fill the void in her life. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Daniel became her confidant, her escape from the loneliness of her marriage. He listened to her vent about Michael's absences and made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. But as their relationship deepened, so did the lies. One fateful evening, Sophia came home early from her enrichment class and overheard Jessica on the phone with Daniel. The conversation was graphic and left no doubt about what was going on. Sophia, devastated, called Michael, who was on a business trip in Chicago. "Dad, you need to come home," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "Mom, she's cheating on you." Michael was stunned. He had always trusted Jessica implicitly, but the pain in his daughter's voice was undeniable. He caught the first flight back to Springfield, determined to confront Jessica. When Michael arrived home, he found Jessica in the kitchen, oblivious to what had happened. He didn't say a word at first, just handed her his phone with the recording Sophia had made. Jessica's face turned pale as she listened to her own voice. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain what?" Michael snapped. "How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around with one of my employees." Jessica tried to defend herself, but the damage was done. Michael packed his bags and left that night, leaving Jessica alone in the house they had shared for over 2 decades. In the weeks that followed, Jessica's life unraveled. Michael filed for divorce, and the kids, once so close to her, now kept their distance. Sophia refused to speak to her, and Ethan, though more forgiving, was clearly hurt. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to reassure her. "We'll get through this," he said. "Once the divorce is final, we can be together." But Jessica wasn't so sure. The guilt and shame weighed heavily on her, and she began to question whether Daniel was really the man she thought he was. Jessica's life became a blur of sleepless nights and quiet days. The house, once filled with the laughter of her children and the comforting presence of Michael, now felt like a hollow shell. She tried to distract herself with work, throwing herself into lesson plans and after-school activities, but the weight of her guilt was always there, lurking in the background. Michael, true to his word, had moved out completely. He rented a small apartment downtown, close to the office, and threw himself into work. The kids, Ethan and Sophia, split their time between the 2 homes, but it was clear where their loyalties lay. Sophia, still furious with her mother, refused to spend more time than necessary at the house. Ethan, though more understanding, was distant, his once easygoing demeanor replaced by a quiet reserve. Jessica tried to reach out to them, to explain herself, but her words fell on deaf ears. "How could you do this, Mom?" Ethan asked one evening, his voice tinged with disappointment. "Dad's been working so hard for all of us, and you just threw it all away." Jessica had no answer. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she couldn't undo what had been done. All she could do was try to pick up the pieces and move forward. Daniel, meanwhile, continued to play the role of the supportive lover. He called her every night, reassuring her that they would get through this together. "Once the divorce is final, we can start fresh," he said. "You and me, Jess. We'll build a new life." But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Daniel's promises felt hollow, and his constant need for reassurance made her uneasy. She began to notice little things, the way he avoided talking about the future, the way he always steered the conversation back to Michael and the company. One evening, while they were having dinner at the Rusty Anchor, Daniel dropped a bombshell. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone casual. "Once the divorce is settled, we should go after the company. Michael doesn't deserve it after everything he's put you through." Jessica stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about? The company belongs to Michael and the kids." "I would never." "Come on, Jess," Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp. "You've been complaining about Michael's work habits for years. Don't tell me you haven't thought about it." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. For the first time, she saw Daniel for who he really was, a manipulator, someone who had been using her to further his own agenda. She excused herself from the table and left the restaurant, her mind racing. The next morning, Jessica received a package in the mail. It was from Michael's lawyer, and inside was a stack of documents detailing the terms of the divorce. Along with the papers was a handwritten note from Michael. "Jessica, I never thought it would come to this. I loved you, and I trusted you, but you betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I've tried to be fair in the divorce settlement, but I can't pretend this doesn't hurt. The kids are struggling, and I don't know if they'll ever forgive you. I hope, for their sake, you can find a way to make things right." Jessica's hands trembled as she read the note. She felt a wave of guilt and regret wash over her, but there was no turning back now. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. Things took a turn for the worse when Jessica received a call from the school district. A parent had filed a complaint, accusing her of inappropriate behavior. The details were vague, but Jessica had a sinking feeling it was related to her affair with Daniel. She was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, and the rumors began to spread like wildfire. Jessica felt like her world was collapsing around her. She had lost her husband, her children, and now her career was in jeopardy. She turned to Daniel for support, but he was distant, his calls and texts becoming less frequent. One night, desperate for answers, Jessica drove to Daniel's apartment. She found him packing a suitcase, his face pale and drawn. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel hesitated before answering. "I'm leaving, Jess. I can't do this anymore. The fallout from the divorce is too much, and I need to start over." Jessica felt like she had been punched in the gut. "You're leaving me? After everything we've been through?" Daniel avoided her gaze. "I'm sorry, Jess. I never meant for things to get this messy. But I can't risk my career over this." Jessica stood there, stunned, as Daniel finished packing and walked out the door. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in her life. Jessica returned home that night to find an envelope on her doorstep. Inside was a DVD and a note from Michael. The note was short and to the point. "Watch this. Then you'll understand." Jessica inserted the DVD into her player and pressed play. The screen came to life, showing a video of Daniel at a party. He was laughing and joking with his friends, his words slurred from too much alcohol. "Jessica's a nice distraction," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But let's be real, she's just a means to an end. Once I get what I want from her, I'm out." Jessica felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. She had given up everything for Daniel, and he had been using her all along. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face, as the weight of her mistakes came crashing down on her. Jessica sat on the floor of her living room, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the blank TV screen. The video she had just watched had turned her world upside down. All these months, she had thought Daniel was her salvation, her chance at a new life. But now she realized he had just been using her. His words, his laughter, his disdain, they echoed in her mind like a curse. She felt foolish, betrayed, and utterly alone. The weight of her mistakes pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had given up everything, her marriage, her family, her dignity, for a man who saw her as nothing more than a pawn in his game. The days that followed were a blur. Jessica barely ate or slept, her mind consumed by guilt and regret. She tried to call Daniel, but his number had been disconnected. He was gone, leaving her to face the fallout of their affair alone. The investigation at work was still pending, and the rumors were spreading like wildfire. Parents at the school whispered behind her back, and her colleagues avoided her. Jessica felt like a pariah, someone to be pitied but not trusted. Michael, meanwhile, had moved on with his life. He filed for full custody of Sophia, and Ethan, though still torn, spent most of his time at his father's apartment. Jessica's attempts to reach out to her children were met with silence or cold indifference. Sophia refused to speak to her, and Ethan's responses were short and formal. Jessica's heart ached for the family she had lost, but she knew she had no one to blame but herself. One evening, as Jessica sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a brief moment, she hoped it might be Michael or one of the kids. But when she opened the door, she found a stranger standing there, a tall, serious-looking man in a suit. "Jessica Carter?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm with the school district's investigative committee. We need to speak with you about the allegations that have been brought against you." Jessica's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She invited the man inside and sat down across from him at the kitchen table. He pulled out a folder and began asking her questions, about Daniel, about the affair, about her conduct as a teacher. Jessica answered as honestly as she could, but the more she spoke, the more she realized how damning the situation looked. By the time the man left, Jessica felt like she had been stripped bare, her mistakes laid out for the world to see. The next morning, Jessica received a letter from the school district. She had been formally dismissed from her position, effective immediately. The letter cited conduct unbecoming of a teacher and a breach of trust with the community. Jessica read the words over and over, her hands trembling. Teaching had been her passion, her purpose, and now it was gone. She felt like she had lost everything, her family, her career, her sense of self. Desperate for some kind of solace, Jessica drove to her mother's house. Her mother, a kind but no-nonsense woman, had always been her rock. But when Jessica walked through the door, her mother's expression was one of disappointment, not comfort. "I heard what happened," her mother said, her voice heavy with sadness. "Jessica, how could you let this happen? You had everything, a loving husband, beautiful children, a career you loved. And you threw it all away for what? A fling?" Jessica couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "I don't know, Mom. I don't know what I was thinking. I was lonely, and Daniel made me feel special. But it was all a lie. He used me, and now I've lost everything." Her mother sighed and pulled her into a hug. "You made a mistake, Jessica. A big one. But you're still my daughter, and I love you. You need to find a way to make things right, not just for yourself, but for your kids." Jessica nodded, but she didn't know where to start. How could she possibly make things right when she had hurt the people she loved the most? She spent the next few weeks in a fog, barely leaving the house. She avoided phone calls and emails, unable to face the outside world. But one day, as she was sorting through old photos, she came across a picture of Michael and the kids from a family vacation. They were standing on a beach, smiling and laughing, the sun setting behind them. Jessica stared at the photo, her heart aching with regret. She had taken that happiness for granted, and now it was gone. Determined to at least try to make amends, Jessica reached out to Michael. She sent him a letter, apologizing for everything she had done and asking for a chance to talk. To her surprise, Michael agreed to meet her. They met at a quiet cafe downtown, the tension between them palpable. "I'm sorry, Michael," Jessica said, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you, and I know I hurt the kids. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret everything. I was selfish, and I made terrible choices. But I still love you, and I love our family. I don't know how to fix this." Michael looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "I don't know if we can fix this, Jessica. What you did, it changed everything. But I do believe you're sorry, and I think the kids deserve a chance to heal. Maybe, in time, we can find a way to move forward. But it's going to take a lot of work, and it's not going to be easy." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes. I just want a chance to make things right." Jessica left the cafe that day with a glimmer of hope, but she knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Michael had agreed to let her see the kids, but only under supervision, and only if she respected their boundaries. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first meeting with Ethan and Sophia was awkward and tense. Ethan, though still hurt, was willing to hear her out. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. "I don't get it, Mom," he said. "How could you do this to us? To Dad? We were a family." Jessica took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I don't have an excuse, Ethan. I made a terrible mistake, and I hurt all of you. I was selfish, and I wasn't thinking about how my actions would affect everyone else. But I want you to know that I love you, and I'm so sorry for what I've done." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Mom. But I'm willing to try. Just, don't mess this up again, okay?" Jessica reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I won't, Ethan. I promise." Sophia, however, was a different story. She refused to meet with Jessica, saying she wasn't ready. Jessica respected her decision, but it broke her heart. She wrote Sophia a letter, pouring out her feelings and apologizing for the pain she had caused. She didn't expect a response, but she hoped that someday, her daughter would be willing to forgive her. In the months that followed, Jessica focused on rebuilding her life. She started seeing a therapist to work through her guilt and regret, and she began volunteering at a local community center, helping kids with their homework and organizing after-school activities. It wasn't the same as teaching, but it gave her a sense of purpose. She also reached out to old friends, many of whom had distanced themselves after the scandal. Some were hesitant at first, but over time, they began to welcome her back into their lives. Michael, meanwhile, was trying to move on as well. He started dating again, though he kept it casual, not wanting to rush into anything serious. Jessica tried not to let it bother her, but it was hard seeing him with someone else. She knew she had no right to feel jealous, but the pain was still there, a constant reminder of what she had lost. One evening, Jessica was sorting through some old boxes in the attic when she came across a photo album. It was filled with pictures of her and Michael from their early years, college parties, their wedding day, the births of Ethan and Sophia. She sat down on the dusty floor, flipping through the pages, her heart aching with nostalgia. They had been so happy once, so full of hope and love. How had it all gone so wrong? As she closed the album, Jessica made a decision. She couldn't change the past, but she could try to make the future better. She would focus on being the best mother she could be, even if it meant accepting that her relationship with Michael was over. She would work on forgiving herself, even if it took years. And she would never take the people she loved for granted again. Jessica's journey toward healing was slow and often painful, but she was determined to keep moving forward. She continued her therapy sessions, delving deeper into the reasons behind her choices and learning how to forgive herself. Her therapist encouraged her to focus on the present and the future, rather than dwelling on the past. "You can't change what happened," her therapist said, "but you can choose how you move forward." One of the hardest parts of the process was rebuilding her relationship with Sophia. Her daughter remained distant, refusing to answer her calls or respond to her letters. Jessica respected Sophia's boundaries, but she never stopped trying. She sent her small gifts on her birthday and holidays, along with heartfelt notes expressing her love and regret. She didn't expect an immediate reconciliation, but she hoped that someday, Sophia would be ready to talk. Ethan, on the other hand, began to soften toward her. He started visiting her more often, and their conversations became less strained. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan turned to her and said, "I've been thinking a lot about everything, Mom. And I just want you to know. I forgive you." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more to me than you'll ever know." Ethan shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm not saying it's all okay, but you're still my mom. And I want us to be a family again, even if it's not the same as before." Jessica reached out and hugged him tightly, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. "We will be, Ethan. I promise." As the months turned into years, Jessica's life began to stabilize. She found a new job at a small private school, where she was able to rebuild her career as a teacher. The scandal had faded from people's memories, and she was grateful for the chance to start fresh. She also reconnected with old friends and made new ones, building a support system that helped her through the tough times. Michael, too, seemed to be doing well. He had started a serious relationship with a woman named Claire, and while it was hard for Jessica to see him with someone else, she was happy for him. They had managed to establish a cordial co-parenting relationship, putting their children's needs first. It wasn't the life Jessica had envisioned, but it was a life she could live with. One day, as Jessica was preparing for the new school year, she received a letter in the mail. It was from Sophia. Her hands trembled as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with a few lines written in Sophia's neat handwriting. "Mom, I'm not ready to see you yet, but I wanted to let you know that I'm thinking about you. I've been talking to my therapist about everything, and I'm starting to understand that people make mistakes. I'm still hurt, and I'm still angry, but I don't want to hate you forever. Maybe someday, we can talk. Love, Sophia." Jessica read the letter over and over, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, next to the photo album she had found in the attic. It was a reminder of how far she had come, and how much further she still had to go. The final step in Jessica's journey came unexpectedly. One evening, as she was grading papers at the kitchen table, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find Sophia standing there, her expression nervous but determined. "Hi, Mom," Sophia said softly. Jessica's heart leapt. "Sophia, come in." They sat down in the living room, the air thick with tension. Sophia took a deep breath and said, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. And I realized. I don't want to lose you. I'm still hurt, and I'm still angry, but I miss you. I miss having a mom." Jessica reached out and took Sophia's hand, tears streaming down her face. "I miss you too, sweetheart. More than anything. And I'm so sorry for everything." Sophia nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. "I know, Mom. And I think I'm ready to start forgiving you." They sat there for hours, talking and crying and laughing. It wasn't easy, and there were still wounds that needed time to heal, but it was a start. For the first time in years, Jessica felt like she was truly moving forward.